What's going on, everybody? Welcome into a three-part series in which I look at how the Portland Trail Blazers could use the third overall pick and potentially still try and win next year with Damian Lillard still on the roster. We're going to be taking a look at three prospects, as I do believe this is a four-prospect draft, with Victor Wembanyama obviously going to go number one, and then number two is up in the air. It's either going to be Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller. I'm also extremely high on Amen Thompson, and the Blazers, if they elect to use the third overall pick, will have two of Miller, Thompson, and Henderson on the board to choose between. They recently brought in the Thompson twins for a workout. We talked about that on stream over on our second channel last night. There's a link to the second channel in the description box below if you want to go watch that stream. But in this series, I'll take a look at how the Blazers should try and build around the roster with certain trade options and MLE targets and so forth. This series is brought to you by BetOnline. Use the promo code BELIEVE, B-O-E-A-V, for a 50% reward bonus. You can get in on finals action with all sorts of types of betting, live betting, parlays, and so forth, so definitely check out BetOnline. Now, I actually decided to put all three names on a wheel and spin it for who we have first. We got Scoot Henderson, and this is definitely going to be the trickiest one to do. I was actually hoping to put that off so I could think about this scenario a little bit more, but I'm going to think about this on the fly as we record this thing. As far as Scoot Henderson goes, bringing him in and keeping Anthony Simons and keeping Shaedon Sharpe would create a three-guard lineup with Dame, Ant, and Scoot, and Shaedon Sharpe would have to play essentially all his minutes at the small forward position. Now, Shaedon Sharpe's measurements are suitable for the small forward position. I do think he can play that position if he adds strength this offseason. However, I think his more natural position is the 2. So you're already kind of doubling down, maybe tripling down on a small ball lineup, especially with a small third guard in Scoot Henderson, who's 6'2", but has a 6'9" wingspan. So I think he can defend some 2s. He's strong. So I think he could play some minutes next to Damian Lillard. But if you have Shaedon Sharpe at the 3 in those lineups, defensively, there's just major question marks, and the size just isn't the best. So, in such a scenario where the Blazers elect to draft Scoot Henderson with the third overall pick, should he be there, I think the Blazers have to seriously explore trading Anthony Simons. And some trades that I wouldn't normally consider for Anthony Simons start to become more viable, in my opinion. Such as Anthony Simons straight up for OG Anunoby. I think the Raptors would have to throw in some additional salary, but that trade balances the roster more. If Dame would be happy with that trade and drafting Scoot, then I think you have to pull the trigger on that one. And I think it would be dumb for the Raptors not to. I think that would be a great trade for them. They need that guard of the future, in my opinion. You may be able to get a little bit more asset value out of the Raptors. However, they're super high on OG Anunoby, and Masai Ujiri is very stingy. If the Blazers did an Anthony Simons for OG Anunoby trade, you could have Dame with Shaedon Sharpe at the starting shooting guard spot, but then Scoot Henderson is the backup guard. But Sharpe being able to slide over and play some spot minutes at the 3 would be more ideal for him, and then Scoot would be able to get more minutes that way, since Sharpe wouldn't be playing all his minutes at the shooting guard position like Anthony Simons would be. We've done a lot of stuff around Jaylen Brown. The Blazers could be hopeful that Anthony Simons and multiple first-round picks, I'm talking probably 3 future firsts, could get a deal done for Jaylen Brown. And then you could have Dame, Sharpe, Brown as your starting point guard, shooting guard, and small forward, and then you'd have Scoot off the bench. The Blazers would then need to figure out the backup small forward spot, but you would have your perimeter core there. Now, what's lost in the Scoot scenario is you're not getting much front court help. If the Blazers draft Brandon Miller, I think he can play some 4, and that solves a bit of the hole at the backup power forward position behind Jeremy Grant. And obviously, in all these scenarios, bringing Dame back, you assume that Jeremy Grant's coming back as well, and Jusuf Nurkic is coming back as well. Maybe if the Blazers have assets left over and solve some issues, they can swap Nurkic out for somebody else, maybe a Miles Turner, I don't know. But I'm not big on spending assets to replace Jusuf Nurkic with similarly flawed centers or centers that don't rebound like a Miles Turner next to Jeremy Grant. That just seems like a disaster. So I'm not really going to focus on the starting 4 and 5 positions. But basically, in any scenario where the Blazers draft Scoot and still have Dame, it just comes down to what happens with Anthony Simons in such a scenario, and how do the Blazers fill the backup power forward and center positions? Because the Blazers should still have a full mid-level exception worth approximately $12 million this year. It got bumped up in the new CBA, so they should have some money to spend on the backup 4 and 5 spots. The problem is there's not a whole lot of talent there in free agency, so it may be better to try and target some guys via trades, and I've had videos on under-the-radar targets. A Daniel Gafford could slot in. As far as more Ant trades, maybe you could swap Ant and multiple firsts for Pascal Siakam. However, I think the Raptors are going to be too stingy on that. I don't think that's really doable, and I'm not really sure what other straight-across trades with Anthony Simons for a small forward makes sense. I'm not willing to trade Anthony Simons for a backup 4 and 5. Yes, I know it kind of solves 2 holes and it clears minutes at the guard position. However, I don't think the Blazers are in a position to give up the asset and the player that Anthony Simons is for 2 lesser assets and lesser players, because I think they need as much talent as possible. That's why it is tough to draft Scoot and keep Damian Lillard and keep Shaedon Sharpe, is because Anthony Simons, just having him as well, it's very valuable, but you have 4 key guys, 4 core guys that should be playing the guard position. Now, let's say they keep all 4 of those guys. I don't feel comfortable starting Shaedon Sharpe at the small forward position next to Anthony Simons and Damian Lillard if the Blazers are trying to win next year. I think the most viable solution would be to go out and get a 3-and-D small forward that can maybe slide up to the 4, and the clear-cut target for that, in my opinion, would be Dorian Finney-Smith of the Brooklyn Nets, who kind of struggled last year, especially when he played for the Nets, but for years has been one of the premier 3-and-D guys in the league. Had big moments during the Dallas Mavericks Western Conference Finals run in 2022. He's a guy that can knock down threes and defend, and he has the size to play the 3 and some small ball 4. So if the Blazers could trade maybe the 23rd pick for him, or trade a future first, messing around with their protections on the 2024 first they owe Chicago, then being able to bring Dorian Finney-Smith in to be the starting small forward, and then play some of his minutes at the power forward so that Sharpe has enough minutes at the small forward spot could make some sense. And then you'd have Dame, Ant, and Scoot as your 3-guard lineup. Finney-Smith maybe playing like 18 minutes a game at the starting 3 spot, and then Sharpe off the bench maybe playing 30. And then at the power forward position, you could have Grant, and then maybe Dorian Finney-Smith plays like 10 minutes per game there at the backup 4 spot. And then you would really just need a backup center in that scenario. And that would essentially give you an 8-man rotation with every player playing a decent amount of minutes. Now, people will wonder, how does Matisse Thybulle factor in? I think if the Blazers draft Scoot and keep Dame, that Matisse Thybulle doesn't have a spot on this team next year, because if you have Sharpe at the backup 3, you got to find a starter. And I don't think Matisse Thybulle is good enough to be a starter. I think you need to go out and get somebody better if you're trying to satisfy Dame enough to be okay with drafting a point guard at the 3rd overall pick. Now, I know some people out there will want to start Sharpe at the small forward position and bring Thybulle off the bench. I just don't think that roster is good enough. I think that roster is play-in at best, and even then, you're probably looking at a 9 or a 10 seed. I just don't think that team is much better. You're bringing in Scoot Henderson, and that's basically it in such a scenario. Maybe the bench can be a little bit better, and you're hopeful that Ant and Sharpe take a step up, and you're hopeful that Scoot can be that guy from day one. However, Scoot's minutes would be limited, being stuck behind Ant and Dame, so I just think that roster is just kind of bleh. You gotta go out and get like a legitimate 3-and-D guy that can be respected behind the 3-point arc more than Thybulle is, and be a lockdown defender of the same caliber that Thybulle is. I think Thybulle is a little bit overrated defensively. I talked a bit about it during his player review. I don't like how much he gambles, especially without a rim protector like Joel Embiid behind him. I would love it if he just tried to be more solid instead of, at times, letting guys beat him so he could try and block their shots from behind or back tip the ball off the dribble or that sort of thing. So I don't think Thybulle is a perfect defensive player, especially for this team that needs a guy to just be solid and contain dribble penetration. So getting somebody like a Finney-Smith would be nice. In such a scenario, the Blazers would trade Nasir Little for him. That's a little bit more than $6 million of salary, and then they'd probably throw in a Kevin Knox or a Keon Johnson to get the salary there to match. However, in the scenario where they don't make a trade and they bring back Thybulle potentially, Nasir Little doesn't have a role on that team either. And Cam Reddish definitely doesn't have a role on that team. I think Cam Reddish at this point, for me, is just complete afterthought and somebody that I don't envision being on this roster next season whatsoever. But this scenario also shows why bringing in Matisse Thybulle for a couple second-round picks and gambling on Cam Reddish just didn't matter to me last season, because if you draft somebody with the 3rd overall pick, it's going to be somebody that plays a perimeter position, either the point guard, shooting guard, small forward position, regardless if it's Brandon Miller, Amen Thompson, or Scoot Henderson. And in my opinion, you have 5 rotation spots at the point guard, shooting guard, and small forward positions. With Dame, Ant, Sharp, and whoever's drafted at number 3, that fills 4 out of the 5 spots. And then you still potentially have Thybulle, Nasir Little, and Cam Reddish to fill the final one, and you can make the argument that the Blazers need to do better than all 3 of those guys. This is why I didn't view this past year's trade deadline as anything regarding the Blazers trying to get better in the future. It just seemed completely pointless to me. I do think Thybulle is the one guy that has a chance to play a role on a good team, but even then I think the Blazers need to do better. Now, if the Blazers do draft Scoot at 3, the one thing I'm really worried about is Anthony Simons getting traded for one of the players on my 4 targets to avoid list. I feel like an Anthony Simons for DeMar DeRozan trade would be coming, and DeMar DeRozan would be the starting 3, Sharp would be the starting 2, Scoot would come off the bench, and the Blazers would have a bottom 3 defense again, because DeMar DeRozan doesn't solve any defensive issues, and spacing-wise, he's not a good 3-point shooter, needs the ball in his hands. You'd have 4 guys that like the ball in their hands in the starting lineup. I just think it'd be a very clunky fit, and then you bring Scoot off the bench too. Like, it just seems like it's too many guys that don't play well enough off the ball or have questions in that regard. So DeMar DeRozan on that team I think would be a nightmare with him getting older. I think it might make Dame happy because Dame is really cool with DeMar, but that type of trade is what I'd be afraid of. Or potentially Simons for DeAndre Ayton and using Nurkic's salary elsewhere. I just don't think that accomplishes anything at all, and it doesn't solve the small forward spot. Karl Anthony Towns could be another guy. Simons and Nurk in a future 1st or 2 for him. While that may seem like good value, I don't like the idea of Dame, Sharp, whoever the small forward would be, like Thybulle, Grant, and Karl Anthony Towns. That lineup just is not good enough on the defensive end to do anything. I'd be really worried about Anthony Simons being traded for a number of guys that don't solve perimeter defense or rebounding or anything, especially if it still leaves a hole at the small forward position. Because I think outside of whatever moves the Blazers make, the biggest question is, who's the starting small forward next year? Anyway, let me know what you think about this scenario down in the comment section below. I'm really looking forward to talking about Amen Thompson and Brandon Miller in part 2 and part 3 of these videos because their fits are cleaner and make more sense from a positional standpoint, and it'll be easier to talk about those hypotheticals than it was this one. We got the hard one out of the way first, but let me know what sort of roster you'd envision with Dame and Scoot both on the roster. Let me know who you think the Blazers should go after via trade. Let me know who you think they should try and sign him free agency. Save your "the Blazers need to trade Dame because they have Scoot" comments, because I've read a million of those and we get it. There's some of you out there that want to trade Dame. We know. And I get that having Dame and Scoot makes building a cohesive roster troubling, but I want to know how you guys would make it work if you had to keep Dame and draft Scoot at 3. Anyway, thank you to BetOnline for sponsoring this video. We're out of here. I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.